Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art Podcasts co-production recorded on a Wagbical country. And I pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show.
I think it's really important when you're writing romance, find characters that give something to each other. So you really want to sit down and say, okay, so what does Gabriel bring to this romance with Noah? What can he show him? And in turn, what can Noah show Gabriel?
Welcome to Date with a Debut, a podcast about debut authors, their incredible books, and their journey to publication. If you are looking for a new author to discover or writing inspiration for your own story and you don't know where to start, this is the place to be. I'm Nick Wasiliev, author of When Men Cry and your host for today's show, and I'm delighted to welcome another debut author in today's episode. If you enjoy the show, or indeed any other shows on the Words and Nerds platform, jump online and give us a thumbs up, a 5-star review, wherever you are listening. Thank you for listening to us and for supporting the Australian book industry. You can also find any books mentioned in today's podcast down in the description. Today, I'm joined by Abra Pressler, who writes romantic fiction and works in marketing. She judged the Valerie Parv Award for Romance Writers in Australia, the 2023 Erotica Prize, and the 2022 Sex and Gender Prize for Stringy Bark Publishing, and served on the board of Marion from 2018 to 2020. She self-published several books, namely More or Less, and The Next Big Thing. But we're here today to talk about her mainstream debut, Love and Other Scores, published by Macmillan Australia, which you can get a copy of right now in the description. I started off by asking Abra about her writing journey, and now that her debut has been out in the world for some time, how the reaction surprised her.
I began writing at around 13. I have always loved writing. I really wanted to write my own stories from a very young age. And I think with a lot of similar writers, it begins with, reading a whole heap of books and being like, oh, I could write something that I have always wanted to read, but I can't find in a book. And so I started writing my own stories, and I continued doing that all through high school. And by the end of high school, I said to my parents, I was like, I want to do an arts degree. And they went, oh dear. And so that's completely untrue. Humanities and arts degrees are completely employable. But I went to RMIT. I was very lucky. I got into RMIT with a portfolio of my writing that I had done. And I went and did their creative writing, the Bachelor of Arts with a specific focus on creative writing. I was there for 3 years and I got my degree there. And I started writing, but as I'm sure that when you're focusing on study, and especially like writing and digesting literature and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't leave the creative juices flowing. And so I sort of was trying to find my space. I was like, oh, maybe I could write domestic noir. I really like the domestic crime that's coming out as a reader. Maybe I could try that. No, didn't really suit me very well. It was quite challenging. And so I had a little bit of time between finishing my degree, and I went into the industry and I started working in communications and marketing and project management. And then I was in a really hard time in my professional career, and I was like, oh, I'm going to write a romance. I really need something light and fun and creative. And I feel like creative in, fun and easy in air quotes, because nothing is super easy about writing romance. It can be quite difficult, but I was just like, I need something that I feel like I can connect to. And I'd always loved romance. I love, Nora Ephron, and I love reading, Danielle Steele's and stuff like that. So I was like, I'm going to try this. And that led me to self-publishing a novel around 2020 when the pandemic hit. I was at home. I had this queer romance that I had set in Canberra about a chef falling in love with a diplomat because the chef was out of work. So he took part-time shifts as an Uber delivery driver. And because Canberra is quite small, he found that he was always delivering to very similar people because they relied on the delivery apps so much. And one of those people is the person that he's interested in, a diplomat. So I wrote this very small novel set in Canberra, very small scope. found myself in the middle of the pandemic and was just like, I'm going to publish this because I have nothing else to do. So I got it all edited, sent it out, made a heap of mistakes, as you do when you try something for the first time, got it all published, and then suddenly it had sold, 3,000 copies through a whole heap of different means. And I got a couple of emails from publishers saying, hey, we'd like to read it. Can you give us the manuscript and, think of us when you have another copy and another book ready to go. And I was just like, oh my God, that's amazing, because I tried shopping this manuscript around, but there was just no appetite for it. So around 2021, I sort of sat down and was like, right, I have this idea for a tennis romance set at the Australian Open. I think it's highly commercial. I think I could sell it. And so I sat down and wrote probably about 4 or 5 chapters, and then I submitted those chapters to the Penguin Random House Write It Fellowship. And they sort of said, you need to make sure that you have a finished manuscript when you submit this novel. I didn't, and I was like, I can finish this, not a problem, by Christmas. I ended up getting shortlisted for that, and I very quickly had to polish it up and finish that novel and send it to Penguin Random House. They passed on it because it was in such rough condition, because I didn't finish the book to the standard that if I had the time, it would have been better. By that point, I had a whole manuscript ready to go. And I was just like, right, let's see how I can go and start pitching it and polishing it and doing all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, and then Love and Other Scores got picked up by Macmillan, which is its own story as well. That was full on. But yeah.
I love it. It's a long, long journey, and I love as well that similar to me with my first book, I went the self-publishing route to begin with, and then from that went into the actual industry itself. It is a very strange, very, very strange journey, filled with mistakes and errors and wondering what the hell you're doing. So I completely am like, yep, been down there, know that story extremely well. And I love the fact that normally in this podcast I get to chat with authors whose books are literally about to drop, but Love and Other Scores has been out for a little while. It's been doing the rounds. Has the reaction surprised you? And I'm actually curious, what's the funniest thing a fan has said to you?
It's been out since November, and currently we're recording this in mid-January, and Australian Open's just about to start, which was a strategic launch by the publisher to get it out pre-Christmas and to have the lead up, which has been fantastic. So it's been really good. I have told I do wish that sometimes you had a checklist for all the things that you're not supposed to do as an author. And I know most of them, but some of them I have been, it's strange to say how much sometimes feedback at this scale can impact you. And I do wish if I could give authors who are thinking about traditional publishing is to be really kind to yourself, because the scale that you get feedback on your manuscript can be overwhelming. For my indie book, people will buy a book and maybe never read it, or especially for indie, they might not, put it on socials and stuff like that. But yeah, I find that with Love and Other Scores, people really like it. And that's amazing. But then sometimes, because I'm so entrenched in the Bookstagram community, I will just jump on Instagram and someone will have like a little tile, and I've followed them for like years and years, and they've just been like, 2 stars, not for me. And I'll be like, why? And you just have to really pull yourself back. And I would say, the scale of feedback that I got as an indie author on a book that has sold, 3,000 copies within, the year, but, versus Love and Other Scores, which is in Big W, it's in Dimix, it's in Audible, it's all that sort of stuff. And then all these connections that I'd made with people I'd never met in the Bookstagram community who are fantastic and lovely, are reviewing it. And just, the scale of publicity is something that I possibly wasn't mentally prepared for, and that can be a bit challenging, just to drop it and leave it and say, thank you so much for reading the book, really appreciate it. But I did get a really interesting email from a man in Sydney. He's 77 years old, and he just said, thank you so much for writing this book, and I read it cover to cover and I loved it, and it's so fantastic to have representation in Australia and an Australian novel, and so that's why I do it. Like, that's the whole reason.
Those are the best. I love
They really
those.
are.
You get that random email from someone and it's just they send you something and it makes your week. So let us talk about this book. Let us talk about it. Give us your 1 minute pitch for Love and Other Scores.
Okay, 1 minute. So Gabriel is a French tennis player. He has been in the top 10 for quite a while, so he's quite well known. He's got very good hair. People think he's very sexy on tour. People find him quite attractive. He's the typical young tennis player. And so he comes to Australia, but he is completely burnt out by tennis. There's been an inciting incident at the early part of the book that has happened, and he's just, really questioning himself, questioning why he continues to do this. After a bit of a blow up, he decides to go for a walk and cool down, and he ends up stumbling into a bar and he meets Noah, who is our other main character. Noah's a bartender who has moved to Melbourne, running from a dark past. We could possibly say he's hiding some secrets, but Gabriel and Noah meet in a bar and, they get to talking and they really vibe with each other. And Gabriel sort of says that, I'm here on business, and Noah doesn't know sports. And so he's just like, oh, cool. Well, why don't I show you around Melbourne? And so that's how it really starts. And it's really, deeply rooted in tennis and the Australian Open in Melbourne. And it looks at a lot of really important things like queer representation in sport, particularly tennis, which is a sport that, doesn't have any players who are openly gay on the professional circuit in the males singles professional league, I suppose. So that's a really important aspect of it. I think it's just, a great novel.
It is. I will say this: it is a lot of fun. If you want something fun, it is such a beautiful, enjoyable read. Touching and a great ideal. We were talking about it before we started recording, but I reckon for anyone who is new to the queer romance genre, an ideal jumping on point, especially if you love sport. And I start with a question that I also kind of put to Nina Wan when I spoke to her about the Albatross last year, when she dropped that, which of course was a romance story set around the context of golf. The great part about doing this show, for me personally, is that I get to jump into genres that up until now have kind of been outside of my wheelhouse. And queer romance is something I know that I should be diving into much, much, much more. Where did the idea come to frame it around tennis?
Yeah, tennis has always been a massive passion of mine. So I have always loved tennis, and I spent a lot of time, in my early teens watching Rafa and Djokovic, fight it out for the Australian Open year after year. And so I've just continued that love all throughout my adulthood. I did work at the Australian Open one year. I worked for a cafe that was contracted to be one of the food vendors. And so that was a huge boon for me. And I got a grounds pass, and I was able to go to the matches when I wasn't working, and I would clock off and I'd go to a match, and I'd, go home at 11 o'clock at night. And so that was just fantastic. And so I had this idea since around 2015, but, as life gets in the way of writing books. And so when I seriously had this idea, and I had, honed my craft and developed my skills as a writer, and I thought, okay, cool, I think I can tackle this now, because that was a point that held me back from writing it, until 2021. I was like, I just don't think I'm a strong enough writer to write this book. And even now I'm working on one where I'm sort of drafting it, but I'm just wondering, am I here? Am I ready and skilled enough to write the story that I think I can write? But yeah,
self-doubt. It's self-doubt. It's the writer's friend. It's crippling self-doubt. It's always
100%. Yeah, imposter syndrome 101. Can I write this book?
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought the world of sport into this, because it's not necessarily something you would associate with queer romance. And I want to talk about these two boys, Gabriel and Noah. And I love, first of all, what you've done with the dueling POVs in this story. We have Gabe, as you mentioned, French tennis superstar, but also, and we'll keep it as spoiler-free as we can, but we'll touch on some light spoilers, he's feeling a lot of pressure in this situation. The Australian Open is looming over his head, and for a lot of this story, he also struggles with his family a little bit, particularly as this relationship with Noah deepens and he discovers more about himself. And then we have Noah, completely clueless about sport. And again, as mentioned, has secrets of his own. And I also someone who just takes a chance on a guy that he meets and shows him his Melbourne. Many gorgeous locations that sell baked goods, plus good spots for a night out on the town, which we'll keep spoiler free. Again, where did these two characters come from?
Yeah, so Gabriel, I'll start with him because I love Noah, but Gabriel was really the first character that came out of the planning of this novel. And so Gabriel is the amalgamation of every European tennis star ever. And so I really wanted to bring in, I wanted to get that sort of Spanish and Latin inspired name. And so I brought in, the Rafael, I brought in Gabriel, and I was like, right, Gabriel is fantastic name for an up-and-coming tennis player. He is French, but he's also, he's Afro-French, so he's got roots from Algeria coming through. So he's got, beautiful long hair, and long hair, of course, is the staple. We just look at Tsitsipas and he has incredible hair. And so I was like, right, that's a real staple. And even going back to, Bjorn Berg, he had fantastic hair, and Andre Agassi, who had incredible hair. On a more serious note, I also did a lot of research into, so what is the mental health and what are the risk factors of playing such an intense sport like tennis? And, I think Nick Kyrgios has spoken a lot about the mental toll of the tennis circuit on players, and especially young players, because we think that, most of these players come in at 16 or 17 years old, they turn pro, and then they're touring constantly. Maybe they'll get 2 or 3 months at home during the year, but they're with their team. Either they've got like quite a small team where they'll have 1 or 2 people come along with them. But if they're, in Europe, they might have a bigger one. But yeah, they're constantly on the road, constantly living out of suitcases and in hotels. And so I just thought, so what does that look like? Your professional and your personal are completely mixed. Anyone, knows who you're hanging out with. You might only hang out with other players on the tour. You might not see your friends back home. You might not have gone to school in a traditional way. So, all of those networks that you rely on for your mental health are suddenly not there, that other people rely on. Really sat down and thought, so how could you have a relationship and what does that look like? And I think that theme of mental health and prioritizing who you want to be and having an identity outside of your sport is an ongoing sort of thing for Gabriel. With Noah is my next child. He is a kid who is just trying to do his best. He's 20 years old. He's working in this sports bar, doesn't even like sports, but he's like, right, I need a job. And so, Noah is someone who is willing to give sort of anything a bit of a go. He's also someone who is a character who is deeply kind and deeply insecure at the same time. And so he relies a lot on other people's validation of him. And he can become trapped in his own little vortex of self-doubt, as we all can. But I think he's always looking to improve himself and he's always looking for more opportunity. But yeah, I don't really want to go into, I don't want to spoil too much of Noah's backstory because that is, a driving undertone of the novel. But yeah, I think it's really important when you're writing romance to find characters that give something to each other. And, all the best, we think about relationships with our partner. We think, my partner is really good at exploring an issue with me. That's what they bring to our relationship. So when you're writing a romance, you really want to sit down and say, so what does Gabriel bring to this romance with Noah? What can he show him? And in turn, what can Noah show Gabriel? And that's how you can sort of, at a strategic and structural level, create romances between characters who are otherwise, possibly one-dimensional on the page.
I love it. Summarize it. And I know that I wish we had time to also dive into all the other supporting characters around these two. But you've touched on a good point there around the actual craft of kind of these sort of romance stories. I hope I could speak honestly on this. I mean, you've been involved with Romance Writers of Australia. You've judged prizes for Stringy Bark Publishing. And I, as kind of I've alluded to once or twice, you know, you're deep into the world of queer romance. You're a passionate advocate for it, and I again can't stress this enough. I do think this is a really good jumping on point for a lot of people new to the genre. You show a side of Melbourne that is similar that highlights that. It's filled with life and there's colour to it, but also the great thing about these books is that it, as you alluded to, it's the challenges of coming to terms with things like sexuality. And what would you say to someone who might be interested in checking out the world of queer romance and might not have done so before, previously?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think, you know, there's been a huge boom both in Australia and overseas in the investment in queer publishing romance. I want to be, you know, quite specific in queer publishing romance because, it was previously sort of not seen at this scale, and we're getting a lot imported from overseas, which is fantastic, but it's great to have, you know, homegrown stories. Getting into queer romance, I think there's a lot of universal themes, I would suppose. So, you know, every queer person's story and identity and how they identify is different. And there's so much breadth and understanding, but there's also still a lot of stigma. I hope you don't mind if I mention a book that I'm writing on currently. Can't say too much about it, but one of the aspects of that book is looking at, you know, the stigma around bisexuality and, you know, are you bisexual or are you just, you know, exploring, or are you might date a woman but have only previously dated men, and then there's that bisexual stigma around are you just, you know, figuring stuff out and you'll eventually go back to men. So within LGBT fiction, there's a lot of exploration of those issues, and they really do tackle significantly hard issues within a setting that is very fun and light and often quite well-natured, and you always know that there's going to be a happy ending at the end, which is key in romance. If it doesn't have one, it's not a romance. I'm very sorry. That gives queer romance so much opportunity to talk about really important issues in the queer community, like the HIV/AIDS crisis, ongoing, you know, book banning and drag issues around drag queens and, you know, their influence on culture, I suppose. I'm not sounding that right, but you know what I mean. And, you know, ongoing rights in the US. And then you can also get into so much culture around, you know, own voices, authors who are writing queerness, but within their own cultural lens. So, you know, I'm a white Caucasian Australian. I'm writing from a white Caucasian Australian perspective. But there's so much breadth to the experience. And, yeah, it's such an exciting time. And so, again, I would recommend using mine as a springboard, but there's so much really fantastic work, especially in YA, if YA is more of your thing. Like I'm reading Andy and Santi Were Here, and it's just this incredible novel. I loaned it from the library. I've been waiting for ages, but yeah, it's fantastic. But, you know, Casey McQuiston is a huge figure in queer publishing, and they're coming out with a new book this time, you know, in 8 months' time, that I'm really looking forward to. So there's heaps to read, which is just so exciting.
Yeah, and there's so many great authors out there like Lexis Hall, Colleen Hoover, who are all kind of really pushing that space. The thing I love about it from the books that I have read is just the expression. The whole thing is about expressing who you are and discovering who you are, which I think is universal. You don't necessarily have to be part of that community, but you can connect with that story about self-identity and self-discovery. And I think it is something that, is something that everyone should at least look at and examine at some point within their reading tastes and palate. And it's really great that you've been championing this space of queer romance, particularly local queer romance. I love it.
Yeah. We need heaps more. Honestly, if you've got one and you're writing one, I would say continue, because there's a huge appetite out there for it.
I want to keep talking about this book, but I also want to ask you about your journey to publication. So you kind of touched on it a little bit when you were talking us about your writing journey. This amazing book arrived and then it got picked up. Tell me a bit more about it.
Yeah, so I had been pitching this novel for quite a few months. And so I had this fully finished novel. It was mostly polished. And so I thought, right, I'll pitch it. I was very lucky to have Shelley Burr, actually, she recommended to go through the Australian Society of Authors pitch nice. Speed dating pitch. She said she had really great success with it, so I gave that a good shot. I connected with a publisher and an agent there, and they both requested it, which was fantastic. And so if you don't know what that pitch session is, it's 3 minutes. You have to summarize it in 3 minutes. And I really trained for that like it was like a marathon. And two of them said, yep, I'd love to read it. And so I sent it off to both of them. I waited a couple months. I sent it to some people in the US as well, just some agents, and sort of shortlisted how it went. And then I got to around January and I had 2 rejections off of the pitch, but with a note to send future material to them. So that's still a win. That's fantastic. And so I got to the Australian Open and I was literally in Rod Laver Arena. This is how much I love tennis. I was in Rod Laver Arena. I was watching Rafa play and I was just like, I'm going to publish this book myself anyway. Like if it gets to the end of this year, I'll probably self-publish it. Let's just try and pitch unconventionally. And so I wrote a tweet, and if you want to see the tweet, it is on my Instagram, but it said something like, I have a diverse friends to lovers romance set at this Australian Open. I've won heaps of awards, well, not heaps of awards, but it's won awards and I'm fantastic to work with. I just slid that in at the end because I really wanted to be like, I'm great to work with. And so I sent that off. A couple people retweeted it, which was fantastic. And then around a day later, I got an email from Macmillan via my website, and they said, hey, we've seen you tweet, would love to read the book. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I polished up the first couple chapters, sent it to them. About 2 weeks later, they said, hey, we want to read the whole thing. And so I sent them the whole thing. And then 4 weeks after that, they offered me a contract. And I met with them and I said, thrilled to get a contract. What are your plans for the book? And I would encourage anyone, if they're getting to this stage, to meet with your publisher and to get legal advice. So I did all that and I sat down with them and I said, what are your plans? And just made sure we were on the same page. And we talked about the approach for the book and what the editing would look like and what the timeline would look like. And they said, we really want to get it out by November. So that'll be quite a crunch, but we think we can do it if you're up for it. And I said, yeah. And so I signed and it's just been fantastic. Like I couldn't have asked for a better group of people to put the book into. Like they just got it. So I was thrilled to work with them.
Yeah, I do know there's so many passionate people in those teams. You've got your editors and your designers and people who craft and put that book together. I can ask this question of you because it's one that a lot of people have some experience with self-publishing, custom publishing, and the mainstream, and not with the mainstream, and or vice versa. But you've done both. How did the process of going through a mainstream publisher compare to the world of self-publishing?
So it was such a learning experience. I went into the whole process thinking, I'm going to suck everything I can out of this traditional published experience. So, I don't know if I'll get another. That's the thing. And so one of the major differences was the developmental edit. When I published more, which was my self-published romance, I had sort of maybe sent it around to a couple of trusted people, and they gave me their feedback. Because we're friends, they were just like, it's fine, it's great, I like this part of it, but maybe this part, maybe not so good. But when I sat down with Pan Macmillan, they really went through, this part is really strong, but this part needs adjusting, and this part doesn't make sense for your character's motivation, and this part, you need to sort of consider this. And so everything that they do are suggestions. You're not obligated to make any changes. But I have really sat down and thought about the book critically, and that was one of the big differences between self-publishing and traditionally publishing. The other aspect is, of course, marketing. When you're an independently published author, you have to market the whole thing yourself, and there are different avenues to doing that. But I think through the traditional publishing, they handle, my publishers at Pan Macmillan handle all of the marketing. I, of course, do a little bit of social media and a couple of reels, which they sometimes reshare, which is fantastic. And that's really all I should be doing, because I want to focus on the next novel. And it's so freeing to just sit there and say, okay, my team are going to market this book and I can just focus on writing. Whereas in indie, you sort of have to juggle both. But I think one of the biggest things I learned in the marketing, because I'm a marketer in my professional job as well, is I came into marketing thinking, yep, I could push my independently published book as well as I could. And it was moderately successful. But one of the big things I didn't do was send out a lot of advanced review copies. And I have just found how incredibly powerful sending out those review copies can be. So, yeah, it's a huge learning opportunity for me, and I'm so grateful for it.
You've been alluding to it a couple of times over this chat, but you are currently working on another book.
Yes.
When can we expect it? I want to know more.
So I've got another book. I've got a couple of projects up in the air and at different stages. I would love to write another book in the universe as Love and Other Scores, and I would love to see that, come to fruition, but not exactly sure just yet. I do have another book that is waiting to be sent to a publisher. They have, first dibs on it, because I did win an award last year for it that said, we have first rights to, accept or reject this manuscript. And that is a YA manuscript about two girls who live in a regional area who are, join their region's first AFLW team. So they're two girls on opposing netball teams who just hate each other's guts, and somehow they have to come together to create this AFLW team that in the region everyone sort of just wants to fail and is just a little, box tick that they have to do to get money to reinvigorate the club's clubhouse. And so that's a YA novel that I'm sort of finishing up. It's honestly almost there. It's like 90% done, and I'm hoping this month I can send it off to the publisher and get that out. But yeah, there's just a couple little things working on. We'll see how everything goes with the book, and hopefully other projects will get up in the air, but we'll see.
We'll finish off with a rapid fire question, part of the date. I'm going to fling questions at you, and you're just going to answer the first thing that comes to your mind. And the only one that I've allowed you to prep for is about books. So the first question is, what is your favorite book that you have read in the last 12 months?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, Book Lovers, Emily Henry. I love the aspect of it. I adored it. I thought it was fantastic.
I'm just going to do a small, mild flex. I didn't get to interview her, but I got to be the producer on a podcast with her, and she had a chat with Taylor Jenkins Reid.
How dare you tell me that? It's like, she's so amazing. And I sat there and I read this book and I just felt so bad. I was like, man, I'll never write like her. She's so fantastic.
The worst part is they were like the two loveliest people, and then when they were actually chatting together, they were also just happened to be also massive fans of each other's work. So I was just like, well, this is wholesome as hell, and this is the sweetest thing ever. But a good book. Well, Book Loves is great.
Fantastic.
What's your favorite debut novel that you've ever read?
Ever read?
Ever read.
I would say I read earlier this year Amy Hutton's Sit, Stay, Love, and that is a debut novel. It is a Australian romance, actually, about a young woman who looks after a dog. She runs like this shelter in memory of her grandma, and she's got a veterinarian man who helps her, and then a movie star comes to town, and it's celebrity romance, which, as you know, with Love and Other Scores, I love celebrity romance. But I read it earlier this year, and I just thought it was incredible. And the way that the prose is so relaxing, it really just feels like you're on a beach in Manly.
Do you have a favourite word?
Purse. That's a word
nice
that I often P-U-R-S-E. I often say purse the lips. I also use nod a lot in the book. I have to do a little search and delete for that one at the end. But yeah, purse is probably my favourite word, to the point that it's also my cat's nickname. His name's Percy. Call him Purse. So it's a pretty good.
That's a nice word, actually. It feels like it just rolls off the tongue quite nicely. Just as a good feeling to it. I appreciate that. What's the best tennis-related pun you've ever heard?
Oh, I don't know. I honestly loved the byline for Love and Other Scores, which was game, set, perfect match. Mm-hmm. And so, in fact, my dad called me when he got the copy of the book, because I sent it to him, and he said, I told you that you should have called your book Love Match, because that's about love and match. And he says, and that would have been perfect for it, because my dad doesn't like the title of the book. He loves the book, and the book is dedicated to my dad, but he's just like, I should have had input on the title. I was like, no, Dad. And so, yeah, I think, I have also really loved when people have said I'm serving up a book, and I just think they're all incredible. I wouldn't have had the creative juices to be able to sit there and think of puns, but they're really fantastic.
I feel like there was something you could do with like the fact that it's like 40 love or 15 love, or do something like that. I was trying to think of some, like, I need to, if I'm going to ask this question, I need to present a pun of my own.
Did really put in at the end, in the later drafts, I sort of said love means nothing. And so he's just like, love means nothing to me. And I was just like, that's a little undercurrent.
I like that.
Love is zero, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, go to town with me on this. What is your favourite trope?
My favourite trope, honestly, I would have to say it's probably celebrity romance, which is everyone's secret fantasy, is my theory. I think that if you sat there and you met someone who was your celebrity crush, like everyone has celebrity crushes. Everyone's just like, hall pass. If I ever met Andrew Garfield, all bets are off, which is, weird to say. But I think it's a universal trope in that most people would think, okay, if I would meet my celebrity, I would want to put the moves on them. And it's also so thrilling to find a celebrity in real life and to say, I don't know, Tom Cruise just walked into my cafe, and we get those little updates where they say, I know Sydney Sweeney's filming a movie in Sydney, and you're just like, oh, well, I see her on the street, sort of thing. So I really love celebrity romance. I think there's a lot in it that is fun. One of the main challenges is convincing your reader that your celebrity is cool and not pedantic and annoying, and actually, never meet your heroes because they're really painful. So it's about giving your celebrity, sort of a real roundness to them, which I think is fun. And often they're very rich, and that can also be very fun when your character gets a credit card and they're being told go wild, and you're just like, I would love to go wild with a credit card. And so, there's a lot in celebrity romance that I think is quite fun and exciting. That's my favorite. I'll read any celebrity romance.
Few things are hotter than financial security. Let's throw it out there, man.
In this day and age, if someone paid off my mortgage, amazing.
Oh, amen to that. Out of curiosity, have you ever had an instance where you've actually seen a sports star or a famous person like from afar and you had like a moment of, oh, they're actually over there?
I did think I played tennis in Canberra, and I did think for a second that I saw Alexi Popperin down at my local tennis club, and I was like, why is he here? I swear that's him. And I did Google recently, and he was overseas somewhere, and I was like, okay, so that's not him. But I do live in Canberra, so it's not uncommon that my friends have seen Nick Kyrgios about, which is very fun. I've never seen him. But I love the little law. I'm not sure if it's similar for you, but in Melbourne, when I lived there was this law that you would see Geoffrey Rush, and if you hadn't seen Geoffrey Rush, you weren't a true Melburnian. And so one day my friend just came to the coffee. It's like, oh, I was in the line with Geoffrey Rush. And Hugh Jackman was another one, I think, when he was in Melbourne, and Eric Bana. So I'm certain that in Sydney and Brisbane, there's laws of like when you see that person, you're a true resident of that city.
Well, I wish you could say the same up here in Newey, but I think but everyone will just be like, have you seen the members of Silverchair? That would pretty much be it. Which unfortunately Daniel Johns doesn't live here anymore, so can't work with that. My weird story on that one is I was at a restaurant in Sydney during the cricket season, and I just noticed there was a lot of people around, and then I look over to my left and there's Virat Kohli just sitting there. And it was at that moment that there is a phrase in cricket that I think a former Australian batsman, Matthew Hayden, said about Sachin Tendulkar, who was like, I've seen God, he bats at number 4 for India in test matches because the obsession with cricketers in India is that insane. And it was at that moment that I realized how real it is, because we're in Australia, he's having like a call with his wife, and there is a crowd about 100 meters pretty much around him of just people going, that's Virat Kohli over there. Which was
imagine living like that.
It would be strange. It would be very strange. But hey, it's the nature of being a sports star, and also fits nicely into the trope of finding romance, which would be even cuter. Do you have a favorite place to read?
I often read at. I live in Canberra, so I am not near the beach, but I often read at the Dixon Pool. So it's so lovely. Honestly, it's one of the best pools. I would recommend any pool because I just live in an apartment, and it's pretty cementy and grey and everything like that. So you just pop down to the Dixon Pool, put out a beach towel, lay down on the grass, enjoy it. Otherwise, in the winter, I'm a big fan of going to bed at 9:30 and then reading until like 2 a.m. and then telling your colleagues, oh, I went to bed at 9:30 and I'm just exhausted. Those are my two main places.
I love it. What is your favorite romance subgenre? I mean, so like if you had to pick a genre, I mean, we've talked about tropes, but I'm like, do you go for your romantic style? Are you in for your steamy romance? If you want something comforty to read, what do you go for in that genre?
Yeah, I would go for a sports romance, and I would want there to be a decent amount of steam. One of the books I'm really looking forward to is Fangirl Down by Tessa Bailey, and it's a golf romance, as we mentioned before, with the Albatross, which is also on my TBR. I would never pick up a golf book, but if you told me that there's a sport and two people are in love in that sport, I am all over it. I particularly really enjoy books where sports are described on the page and there's some intrigue around, how will this person go in a sport and does this sport work? And I like learning about sports. I'm quite sport obsessed in real life. I will bandwagon onto anything. I bandwagon onto the Matildas. I bandwagon every year onto the Sydney to Hobart. Like I'm obsessed with the Sydney to Hobart sometimes. I will watch the cricket. I'll watch any sport. And so that sort of translates into my reading. I will read anything about sport. But yeah, I adore the spicy romances. I prefer when they're really crafted in a way that is, more of a slow burn. I don't particularly like it when everything is sort of happily together and then things falls apart. And there's a big focus on, sex throughout the book. I prefer it when there's a decent focus towards the end. I'm getting quite pedantic now, but yeah, those are sort of my dream books. If I could Frankenstein a book and put it all together, it would look like that.
Now here comes the hardest, cruelest, meanest couple of questions right near the end. Colleen Hoover, Casey McQuiston, Alexis Hall. Fuck, marry, kill.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. I would kill Colleen Hoover. I'm so sorry, Colleen. But it's only because I adore the other two so much. And Colleen Hoover, for me, I haven't read a lot of her books.
Book Talk will kill you for that.
I know. Sorry, Book Talk. I never picked them up, but I do have a few at home. Like I have her popular one at home, but I just haven't read it. I would fuck Alexis Hall. Because I think it would be quite enjoyable. Their sex scenes are quite enjoyable. I quite like them, and I think they write intimacy really, really well. I loved Boyfriend Material. I thought that was their piece de la resistance of their work so far. But I haven't read their new one either. But Casey McQuiston I would marry. I think we would be a fantastic couple. They have fantastic fashion sense, so I think they would take the reins and redo my apartment and get me wearing really cool clothes, like things that I'm just not good at. I think they're fantastic at. And also, as their partner, I would be able to read all of their books before everyone else, which
smart.
That's the peak. I would get to read the pairing right now. I'm so excited for that book. So those are my answers. Lock it in.
Smart. I like it. Good answers and good reasoning. If you could fall in love with one sports star, who would it be?
I used to really want Rafa when he was quite young. Rafa at the moment, he's very well established into his family and his life, and I wouldn't want to tear that away from him. I'd probably say Rafa, like 2010s Rafa.
Yeah, I'll say that. We can give that. And if Rafa was here on the podcast now instead of me, what would you do?
I would cry. Genuinely cry. And then I would apologise for saying that I would marry him and steal him away from his beautiful family. But yeah.
Last two important questions that are sports related. Alex Veneur or Jordan Thompson?
I don't know who either of those are.
Demon or Tomo? They're just played in the United Cup.
Oh, okay. Got it. I think de Minaur is incredible. And, he's 24. I think about me when I was 24, just absolutely lost the plot. But the way that he handles himself, his mental strength, his strength on the field. Jordan Thompson is also fantastic. He's 29 and still, can go toe-to-toe with Rafa and get in quite a late stage of a decent APT tournament. So, yeah, I mean, props to both of them. They're both incredible. But, yeah, de Minaur, and I hope he can go really far in the Oz Open. Me too.
And then the last question, Lance Franklin or Adam Goodes?
That's an awful question.
I know. I saw that you were a Sydney Swans fan. I'm like, well, let's really be nasty now.
Oh, that is such an awful question. How could you even compare?
I can't. I couldn't pick it.
No, okay, if I had to pick, and I was being told by a mean podcast host who I would have to pick, I would probably go Adam Goodes. There's a lot in him that he really championed a club for a very, very long time, and and if we get into the whole thing that happened with the racial circus and all that sort of stuff, he really stood up for not only himself but an entire community, and just the groundbreaking stuff that he's done. And he's so humble and lovely and generous with his time and generous in educating people. And I'm a really big believer that Indigenous people shouldn't educate white people. Like at this point in time, there's so much resources and so much knowledge that we can go out and learn for ourselves. And, we can read books and watch films and listen to podcasts with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. Like, but he did it, and he just forwarded it. And Lance Franklin, let me just say, Lance Franklin, amazing. I watched when he got his 1,000th goal, and I was just like, oh my God, this is a great of our sport. But yeah, Adam Goodes, I think if you had to pit them both against each other, that's who would come out.
I'm sorry, that was the cruelest, nastiest question I could have put to you, and I just was like, should I do it? Should I be mean, or should I let her off? No,
if I get picked up in the media by this, I will be like,
you'll be sending me an angry email. You'll send me an angry email being like, mate, what have you done here? But no, I think I would go Goodsy as well. I was lucky enough to chat with Brandon Jack about his memoir 28. And he talked a lot about Goodsy and just how much. And also, like, I love that he talked about the particular environment that working in a professional sports environment does, and how taxing and exhausting in multiple fronts it can be, physically, mentally, emotionally, how it can really mess you up, and how much of a solid head that Goodsy was for all the younger players coming through. So Goodsy for me as well. Could honestly chat to you all day, but I'm not going to smack you with any more horrible, nasty, tough questions. We are unfortunately out of time, so I'm going to finish off by simply saying thank you so much for chatting with us, Abra. And everyone, go and get a copy of Love and Other Scores. It'll win your heart in straight sets.
Thank you so much, Nick. Huge fan of the pod. I'm so thrilled to be on.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Date with a Debut, and for listening to the Words and Nerds channel. You can buy all books mentioned in today's episode down in the description box, and if you enjoyed the show, or indeed any episode of Words and Nerds, drop us a review, leave us 5 stars or a thumbs up. It is hugely appreciated. Catch you soon.